Hey, what's up? 4 months ago, I made a video about this, asking if the DT 1990 Pro was worth it in 2024. My general consensus was no. It didn't keep up with the current competition in today's climate, and people in the comments kind of tore me apart. They thought I was crazy for even suggesting that, but I do want to say I was kind of right, because even Beyerdynamic thought it wasn't up to date because they just released the Mark II version, the better version of the DT 1990 Pro. So this thing is brand new. It's still called the DT 1990 Pro, but it is the version 2. They've also come out with the DT 1770 Pro, which has also seen some improvements. In fact, more improvements than this has seen, but this will be a separate video in a few days. Now today I have one question that I want to answer. Is this version actually worth it in 2024? They've increased the price to $599. It's available in the links down below, and Beyerdynamic did send this out, but they're not paying me to say anything good or bad. All thoughts and opinions, like always, are my own. Now the build is luckily very similar with some actual minor improvements. One is some aesthetic changes on the grill. They're also using a newly textured grill, which I think will actually be a little bit more scratch resistant than the original one in the 1990. The yolks are now a different color, and there's slightly different badgings around. And now there's a divot in the headband for the top of the head for a little bit of head pressure relief. The biggest difference for comfort is going to be these new inserts on the inside of the pads. This has a bit of a hump in the middle on these foam inserts. And I think this is how they're getting part of the tuning differences that they're getting between these two. But you do feel it a little bit on your ear. This was never a super comfortable headphone, but it's still relatively comfortable, kind of like the original one was. Now with the internal changes, according to kind of a press release that they did, they have like a new Tesla 45 driver that they're calling it. This has some impedance differences between the original version. This is a 250 ohm headphone. This is only at 45. So audiophiles may not like that, but I think for its use case as a professional headphone, this is going to work with more equipment more easily than the 250 ohm version did. Some things that have not changed, luckily, is that this still comes with 2 cables, 2 pairs of pads, a very nice carry case, and is still made in Germany. Now, regarding how this sits in the market right now, there is a headphone that I'm going to bring up a little bit here, which is the new HD 490 from Sennheiser. An update that I wish that they would have gone to kind of keep up with that is dual-sided mini XLR connectors. Now, if they still wanted to use a single-sided cable, that's fine. But one of the benefits of the 490 is that you can switch which side the cable is on. This is a benefit for not only personal preference, but it also offers a bit of redundancy. If any of the ports ever do break, you have the other one that you can use. So this doesn't have that. I would have liked to see that as a physical update to this, but they didn't do that. Now for sound quality, this is interesting to me because they've managed to keep kind of the nature of the headphone, the general feeling and vibe that you get when you listen to the headphone, but they've changed some of the specifics to be a little bit better in some areas and sacrifice a little bit in some other areas. I think largely this is an improvement though, to be honest. The area that most needed correcting was about 8 kilohertz. That was a little bit sharp. It led to S's and T's being a little bit harsh. It led to some user fatigue, and most of the complaints that came from this headphone was regarding that area being a little bit harsh. And they've reduced it quite a lot on the new 1990 to the point where it's not even really an issue. Like when you listen to it, that doesn't come up in your head as the biggest problem anymore. So some big improvements there, especially for users like me. That was kind of the biggest complaint that I had with the 1990 version 1. Version 2 has fixed it. Treble is still very speedy and lively. When you listen to this headphone, it's very active. According to their press release, which I haven't seen in any independent measurements just yet, but it's apparently got a little bit of a bump back at 10K to keep a little bit of that detail, but the overall treble has been reduced a little bit. And you can definitely hear that when you compare the two back to back. Now, those who often find themselves complaining about headphones being too bright, I think that this headphone is still going to be a little bit too bright for those type of users. If you find yourself not really thinking about that or complaining about that too often with most headphones, then I think this headphone is going to hit really nicely in the treble response. And it seems very detailed, very fast. It's definitely worthy of the price tag for its detail retrieval. I am still waiting to see a few graphs because there does seem to be some oscillation in the treble response where there is some brighter areas and some darker areas. So if you're really sensitive to certain areas, I might wait for official graphs on really high-end equipment to come out. I'm sure headphones will end up measuring this. One downside compared to the version 1 is that sometimes this does sound slightly muffled in comparison. When you listen to this, it sounds A little bit harsh, to be honest, but also a little bit unbridled and seems unrestricted. This, you can tell there's a bit of restriction happening, and I think it might be that foam because it is quite a bit thicker than the previous generation. And in comparison, it does lead to a noticeably less sharp, still detailed, but less sharp experience. But sharpness can often feign as detail, so sometimes this does sound a little bit more detailed than that. But for actual true resolution, I think they're just about the same. Now, when it comes to mid-range, this is an area that is affected a lot by S's and T's, just because it changes how you interact with the voice. If a headphone is really harsh there, you might find yourself, like me, wincing, waiting for those sharp S's and T's to pop up. But with this headphone having reduced that so much, vocals are a lot less fatiguing. Also, they've seemingly changed the nature of how vocals are represented. So on the previous 1990, they sort of had this effect similar to an HD800S, where vocals seemed very clear and very defined, but kind of small and kind of in a very finite place, but not very big in size, not very full sounding. And this improves that quite a bit. It's not quite to the level of like an HC600, for example, but it's an improvement over the original one for sure. When it comes to lower mid-range and bass, this is an area that I find very impressive, mostly because it's so much more accessible than the generation number one. Because of the treble reduction, these areas pop through a lot more, and you can actually benefit from the clarity that they offer a little bit more so than you could before. And especially in the lower mid-range, it kind of helps you understand vocals in a more complete sense than the previous generation did, which is one of the reasons why I really enjoy this as a studio headphone. When it comes to actual bass quality and fidelity, it's pretty much the same, which was already pretty good. But because you no longer have to reduce volume to combat the sharpness of the treble response, the apparent volume on the bass is a little bit more than it used to be. So the accessibility is better, and you actually feel like this is a little bit warmer of a headphone, a little bit bassier of a headphone too, than generation number one, even though the bass is pretty similar. So bass and lower mid-range, really good. I would say the bass is stronger than headphones like HD800S and HD600, but less strong than like an LCD2 Classic. Now for sound staging, this still feels a bit like a mini HD800S. It's still a very well balanced sound staging headphone in terms of where things happen. They really do happen all around you. This leads to a really impressive gaming headphone still, though I actually think that the OG for gaming specifically is a little bit better. I feel like the brighter treble is actually less good for music, but is a little bit more advantageous for gaming. In fact, I actually think that my personal preference for gaming right now would be original 1990 first, then the new 1770 Pro, and then the new 1990 Pro. Oddly enough, I prefer this close back over this for gaming. But if you're a gamer on a budget who doesn't have super crazy high-end amplifiers or anything like that to take advantage of a 250 ohm headphone, I think the new 45 ohm impedance is actually a big benefit. You can use this with like new amps like the Shit Gunner that will actually work really well with this. I enjoyed this combo quite a bit. Regarding some comparisons, I really like this headphone a lot for studio use. Its intended use case, I think it absolutely nails. It's a very intense headphone though. And while I think that benefits studio use a lot, I think that that can sometimes be a detriment for just hi-fi listening. And so there are better hi-fi headphones, but I'm not sure if there's a better studio headphone at this price. I prefer this as a studio headphone over the HD490 personally, and the headphones like the HD600 and the outgoing original Generation 1 1990 Pro. So for studio use, this would actually be my new pick. I think they did a great job with studio tuning specifically. Regarding hi-fi listening, it depends on how much you're willing to go up in price. I think the Focal Clear for a little bit more is really, really good. I think that the 490 might be better suited for just personal listening, but not as good at studio stuff. The 109 Pro is also very good. The question though that I originally wanted to answer was, is this worth it in 2024? I think the answer is definitely yes. And I think that moving forward, this will be a good standard for them to set for their future headphones. It's not without its flaws, but no headphone is. And I think that this is definitely playing within the top players, even for hi-fi use at this price range. It's still a very fun headphone to listen to. You just have to know what you're getting into. If you like the original 1990 Pro, I think that this is a definite improvement and worth it to get over that one if you don't already have that one. If you didn't like the original 1990 Pro, I don't know if this will be enough to sway you unless the only thing keeping you away was sibilance, which they've now fixed. So that's kind of how I break it down. All right, I want to thank Bayer for sending this out. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.